Hey guys, tonight we begin with a soft night walk through a city born beside a slow, patient river, an ancient place of stone and mud, of hearthfire and early law, of myths that still whisper when the world is quiet. Tonight, we turn our attention to ancient Rome, how it began, where it rose, and the gentle human rhythms that made a village on 7 hills become one of history's most enduring civilizations. Before we settle in and begin our peaceful journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if what I share here truly resonates with you. Your support helps me create more of these videos, and if you feel like it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see the many corners of the world where we connect. Now, dim the lights, make yourself comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as we explore what lies ahead. Chapter 1: Beginnings, River, Hills, and the First Hearths. Imagine, for a moment, a gentle river bending through a low plain, the Tiber, carrying small boats of reed and wood, full of fish and clay, drifting past reeds and shallow islands. The sound is steady, water over stones, birds calling in the early light, animals grazing on the floodplain. To the west, a series of low hills rises in modest, rounded curves: the Palatine, the Capitoline, the Aventine, and 4 more. These are not the dramatic peaks of distant mountains. They are friendly, human-scale rises where people built simple shelters and watched the river. Early Rome began not as an empire, but as a cluster of villages, families and clans living close to fields, forests, and the river's generous resources. Picture small wooden huts with thatched roofs, smoke curling from an opening in the top, children playing with carved toys, and elders telling stories by the embers. The land was fertile, the salt roots of the coast were not far away, and this location offered both safety and connection, a place where riverside trade met pastoral life. The landscape gently shaped the people. The Tiber was a natural road and a source of food. The floodplain offered rich alluvial soil for crops. The hills offered defensible ground and a vantage over the surrounding plains. These practical advantages encouraged settlement, and over generations, the scattered huts and farms began to knit together into a more unified community. There are 2 ways people have always wanted to know how a city began: through evidence and through story. The stories are warm and simple, meant to be told aloud beside a hearth. One of the best known is the tale of Romulus and Remus. According to the story, twin brothers were set adrift on the river, rescued and suckled by a she-wolf, raised by a shepherd, and, in time, became the founders of a city. Romulus drew a furrow on the Palatine and declared the boundary of a new settlement. In the telling, this story captures something essential: the idea that Rome was born from hardship, nurture, and a decisive gesture that marks the beginning of community. Alongside legend, there is the quieter, patient method of archaeology. Beneath layers of later stone, archaeologists have found post holes and traces of humble huts, pottery fragments, and burial grounds. These finds tell us that people were living here long before the grand marble monuments, that families farmed, traded, worshipped simple local deities, and learned small arts: how to shape clay into vessels, how to weave fiber into cloth, how to mend a plow. The archaeological record reveals a slow, steady accumulation of craft and custom, the invisible scaffolding of civic life. Culturally, early Rome was not isolated. It existed within a wider network of peoples, the Latins in the surrounding plains, Etruscans to the north with their impressive skills in metallurgy, urban planning, and ritual, and Greek colonies to the south with their rich art and stories. These neighbors were sources of influence. The Etruscans built stone drains, introduced refined pottery styles, and brought certain religious rites. The Greeks contributed myths, alphabetic script forms, and artistic tastes. Over time, Rome absorbed, adapted, and remade these influences into its own ways. Let us pause and listen to the day-to-day cadence of these early lives. Mornings begin with the clatter of pots and the low conversations of people preparing simple porridges and breads. Farmers lead oxen to furrow fields. Artisans strike metal on anvils, the steady ringing like distant rainfall. Market days bring a gentle bustle. Traders with baskets of olives, salted fish, woven cloth, and occasionally the exotic goods that have traveled by sea from farther lands. Even then, commerce tied villages into a larger world. Social life grew more formal as settlements clustered. Families began to recognize the need for rules and common decisions. Small councils of elders emerged to settle disputes about land, water, or inheritance. Rituals mattered, offerings at small shrines, blessings for safe childbirth, and rites to assure the favor of the gods. These early practices laid the social soil from which later Roman institutions would grow. One subtly interesting feature of Rome's beginnings is the mixture of practicality and piety. Building a bridge or repairing a road was as much a part of civic religion as offering a sacrifice. Water channels and drainage ditches were technical achievements, but they were also seen as acts that maintained the health of the community and the goodwill of the spirits who guarded the land. This combination of the technical and the sacred would characterize much of Roman life in later centuries. In quiet moments, the people of early Rome watched birds for omens, listened to the flow of the river, and took comfort in small certainties. The turning of seasons, the pattern of sowing and harvest, the birth of a child. These ordinary rhythms formed a comforting cadence that eased anxiety and provided a sense of continuity. It is calming to think that even in the ancient past, people woke to the same sun and found solace in the same small rituals that anchor human life. Yet change was always near. As families increased, trade became more complex, and neighboring communities grew stronger. Old patterns had to bend. A cluster of villages became a town. A town required new forms of leadership. This evolution was gradual. Occasional kings who could unite communities for defense, councils that coordinated irrigation and markets, and laws that began to be written down. Each small step was a new layer in the making of a city. Before we drift further into Rome's later transformations, the Age of Kings, the bold experiments of the Republic, and the distant thunder of imperial ambition, let me offer a quiet invitation. Tonight, we will trace not only the proud monuments, but the slow human work that made them possible. In the next chapters, we will meet early kings and senators, soldiers and merchants, architects and priests. We will sit with one story at dusk and with one engineering triumph at dawn. And as we move through centuries, we will listen for the steady heartbeat beneath all great histories, the human need for shelter, law, meaning, and connection. If you find yourself comfortably settled, breathe in slowly and imagine the Palatine at dusk. Fires twinkle in huts. The river glows with reflected stars, and a small group of people tells a founding story that is carried across millennia. In this gentle image rests the origin of Rome, not a single dramatic moment, but a series of small human acts repeated over generations until a city rose. Chapter 2: From Kings to Republic, the Birth of Roman Leadership. We move now from the soft light of the Palatine and the hush of riverside huts into an age of slow awakening. The age when scattered huts and clustered families began to recognize a single heartbeat, a shared destiny, and a name that would echo through history: Rome. It is a time before marble and empire, before senators and legions, when the city was still learning to speak with one voice. Here, among the misty valleys and on the gentle slopes by the Tiber, power takes its first shape. The world is small, the people few, but the patterns they form, of rule, of faith, of justice, will one day define the most powerful state on earth. Let us linger here, not in haste, but in the calm rhythm of discovery, watching how kings and councils, rites and customs slowly knit together a civilization. The first leaders of Rome were not emperors sitting on thrones of gold. They were organizers, builders, and guardians of tradition. They ruled when power still meant the ability to call neighbors to defend the walls, to dig a canal, to bless a field before harvest. These kings, remembered in legend as Romulus, Numa Pompilius, Tullus Hostilius, Ancus Marcius, and the later Tarquins, carried both sword and staff, strength and sanctity. To be king in early Rome was not merely to command, it was to serve, to keep balance between the gods and the people, between ambition and duty. Romulus, the first king, lives in the soft half-light between myth and memory. The stories tell us he plowed a sacred furrow around the Palatine Hill, marking the city's first boundary. It was a simple act, a man guiding oxen across the soil. But from that furrow came an idea that no sword could cut, the belief that land could be holy, that a community could have a heart. Romulus is also said to have gathered the first Senate, chosen from the heads of leading families to advise him. In that small circle of elders, one can already glimpse the roots of the Roman political spirit: shared counsel, formal discussion, and the notion that power should be tempered by dialogue. Then came Numa Pompilius, remembered as the peaceful lawgiver. Where Romulus was fire, Numa was calm water. He built no great walls, fought no wars, but instead laid down calendars, priesthoods, and sacred offices. He established rituals for every season, prayers for every duty, and days of rest to mark the passing of time. Through Numa, Rome learned to see order as sacred. His reign gave rhythm to life, planting the idea that law and religion were not separate realms, but two hands of the same body. After Numa's quiet reign came Tullus Hostilius, a warrior king who returned the city's attention to conquest and defense. Then followed Ancus Marcius, who blended both war and wisdom, building Rome's first bridge across the Tiber and its early port at Ostia, gestures that opened the city to trade, to travel, and to a larger world. Each of these early kings added something distinct to the Roman story: one strength, another law, another expansion. Together, they shaped a people both practical and proud, both devout and ambitious. As the centuries turned, new influences began to shape the city, particularly from the north, where the Etruscans thrived. The Etruscans were more advanced in art, building, and ceremony. They used arches and stone for their temples and tombs, drained marshes, and carved symbols of authority that would soon appear in Rome itself. From them, the Romans learned to build with discipline and to symbolize power through ritual. The king's purple robe, the curved ivory chair, and the fasces, a bundle of rods tied around an axe, all came from Etruscan tradition. But the Romans, ever adaptable, absorbed these things and made them their own. They did not merely copy, they refined. From this blending of Latin roots and Etruscan craftsmanship emerged a unique identity, Roman, but open to influence, confident enough to borrow and strong enough to transform. The growth of the city demanded more than ceremony. As families multiplied and lands expanded, disputes grew frequent. Someone had to decide who owned a field, who owed a debt, who would lead in war. In these challenges, the first institutions of law and government took shape. Councils of elders, the Senate, advised the kings. Assemblies of warriors gathered to vote on war and peace. Priests read the flight of birds before any major decision, linking the divine will to human judgment. Slowly, what began as the personal rule of kings became something more structured, a framework of customs and obligations. Even before laws were written, they lived in the hearts of citizens. Unspoken understandings about justice, honor, and duty. Society itself was layered like the city's hills. At the center were great families, the patricians, who claimed noble ancestry and held sacred offices. Around them lived the plebeians, the common people, farmers, craftsmen, and traders. The difference was not only in wealth, but in privilege. Patricians could serve as priests and magistrates, while plebeians often had to fight for recognition. Yet both groups depended on each other. The patricians guided, but the plebeians labored. It was a fragile balance that would one day erupt into struggle. But for now, it formed the foundation of Roman order. Power, however, has a way of testing the human heart. In time, the royal line grew proud and cruel. The last kings of Rome, the Tarquins, father and son, ruled with heavy hands, building great works, but neglecting justice. The story that brought their downfall is one of sorrow and courage, and though historians debate its details, its spirit remains clear. It tells of Lucretia, a noblewoman whose virtue was violated by the king's son. Shamed and broken, she called the city's leaders to witness her pain and demand vengeance. Her death, a symbol of lost honor, ignited a fire that no crown could extinguish. The people rose, the Senate acted, and the monarchy was cast down. From this tragedy was born a new order, the Roman Republic. Power would no longer rest in the hands of one man, but in the shared responsibility of elected officials and assemblies. The very word republic, res publica, means the public affair, the thing that belongs to all. Two consuls would now lead the state for limited terms, balancing each other's power. The Senate would guide policy, and the people, through their assemblies, would hold a voice in decision-making. It was an experiment in governance that would evolve and endure for centuries. This transformation was more than political. It was moral, almost spiritual. The Romans had learned that no person, however strong or noble, should stand above the law. Authority needed structure, and structure needed restraint. In place of divine kingship came civic duty. In place of hereditary power came service and accountability. It was as though Rome, in shedding its kings, had grown aware of itself, of its potential and its limits. The shift from monarchy to republic was like a river finding its proper course, deepening as it flows. Yet the new system did not erase tension. The patricians still held much of the power, and the plebeians still carried most of the burden. But now there was a framework for negotiation, for protest, for change. The Republic's strength lay not in perfection, but in adaptability. Laws could be revised, offices created, and disputes resolved through debate rather than rebellion. It was, in many ways, the first great experiment in organized disagreement, an art the Romans would master. Despite all these political stirrings, daily life still revolved around ritual. The Romans found comfort in the steady beat of religious observance, the lighting of lamps before dawn, the offering of grain to household gods, the festivals that marked harvest or victory. Even as senators argued and consuls led armies, the people looked to ritual as their anchor. In a city of growing ambition, ceremony offered calm. It reminded them that beyond the noise of politics, they were part of something enduring and sacred, the bond between human order and divine will. If you close your eyes now, imagine a quiet evening on the Palatine Hill. The fires are low, the air is cool. A group of elders sits beneath the stars, their voices calm and deliberate. Smoke curls from an altar. The river hums faintly below. They speak of justice, of duty, of the fragile gift of freedom. Around them, the city rests, unaware of how far its name will travel, how vast its shadow will one day stretch. In this stillness, we can sense the first pulse of the Republic, steady, confident, alive. As this chapter drifts to its close, let the scene settle gently in your mind. A city no longer ruled by kings, yet not yet an empire. A people learning to share power, to govern by law, and to hold faith in the idea that no one stands above the community. From this quiet beginning will come armies and orators, triumphs and betrayals, glory and ruin. But for now, in the twilight of early Rome, the lesson is simple and profound, that freedom, once born, must be tended like a sacred flame. Chapter 3: Roman Republic, Institutions and Politics. Imagine a wide open space of stone and dust where people come to meet at the edge of the old city. This is the Forum, a place with low buildings, columns, and open sky where voices rise and settle like soft waves. Here, Romans gather to speak, to argue, to vote, and to make decisions that shape many lives. In this chapter, we will sit quietly in that space and listen to how the Roman Republic ran itself, not with one ruler alone, but with many offices, rules, and traditions that tried to share power and keep life steady. At the start of the Republic, Romans wanted to avoid rule by a single person who could do as they pleased. So they made a new plan. Instead of one king, they chose 2 consuls each year. These consuls were leaders who shared the job. They led the army, spoke in public, and made laws with the approval of other bodies. The idea was that no single man should have all the say for long. The year ended, the consul stepped down, and new men took their place. This rotation brought a gentle rhythm to public life, like the passing of seasons. But the consuls did not act alone. A group of older, often wiser men met in a council we call the Senate. These senators were not elected by everyone. Many came from families who had long served the city. They spoke softly at times and with force when needed. The Senate advised the consuls, guided foreign policy, and managed money. Even if it sometimes favored the rich, it offered a steady hand, a long view that helped Rome plan beyond a single year. Alongside the Senate and the consuls were other offices. Some took care of money, some of justice, some of public works like markets and streets. There were officials who oversaw the grain supply, who kept the city clean, and who organized public games and festivals. This web of offices may seem complex, but it worked like a careful system of help. Each part did its small job so the whole city could run smoothly. One of the most gentle and important parts of the Republic was the role of the tribunes. These were officials chosen to protect the common people, the plebeians, against unfair acts by powerful men. A tribune could stand between a magistrate and a citizen and block harmful orders. This right was a shield, a simple protection that underlined a deeper idea. The city belonged to many, not just a few. The presence of tribunes gave ordinary Romans a quiet confidence that their voices mattered. Social life influenced politics. Roman families organized themselves into larger groups. Rich households held power and often guided decisions. Many ordinary farmers, traders, and artisans worked the land, kept small shops, and raised children. Over time, the differences between the well-born and the common people created tensions. The plebeians wanted laws written down and duties shared fairly. The patricians wanted to keep old privileges. These tensions were not always loud fights. Often they were long talks, quiet refusals, and slow changes. At one point, plebeians even left the city to show how much they mattered. This peaceful protest won some rights and helped shape a more balanced system. Elections were another gentle but messy part of the Republic. Citizens came to vote in groups. They did not vote secretly the way we do now. Instead, they stood together in their wards or tribes, and a loud voice announced many decisions. Great speeches were made in the forum. A good speaker could sway the crowd with clear words and simple promises. Some men rose because they were brave in war, others because they were wise in speech, and a few because they understood how to build alliances. The path to high office was known and slow. Young men who wished to lead followed a course of smaller posts, each with its own tasks. Over years, they learned how to manage money, uphold laws, and lead men. This steady climb taught restraint and experience. Yet ambition always lived beside duty. Some men grew hungry for more power, and political life could become a game of favors, alliances, and quiet deals. Sometimes these deals were generous acts of help, and sometimes they were clever ways to gain advantage. The balance between service to the city and service to oneself was a constant theme. There are moments of simple, calming virtue in Roman political life. One warm story many Romans told with pride is the tale of a farmer named Cincinnatus. In a time of danger, the city needed a leader who could act quickly. They called Cincinnatus from his field. He left his plow, led the people with quiet strength, solved the crisis, and then returned to his farm. He did not keep power. He stepped down and went home. This story became a soft reminder that some leaders serve and then return to private life, valuing the common good over fame. It is a small story, but it held meaning. Leadership could be an act of humility, not a ladder to climb forever. Yet politics also had its sharp edges. Men argued fiercely in public squares, rivals whispered in corridors, and families sometimes used marriage and friendship to build power. Laws and customs were tools for peace, but they could be bent by clever or dangerous men. Betrayals, plots, and secret deals existed because people were human. They loved honor, feared shame, and sought advantage. When conspiracies happened, they often began in quiet rooms over wine and soft lamps, where promises were made and then broken. These moments show that power can be gentle and caring, or it can be restless and cruel. Law was the quiet backbone of the Republic. Romans wrote down many rules to make life fairer. The 12 tables were early lists of law that anyone could read. They made certain rights public and predictable. Laws guided marriage, property, and crime. Trials were held in public. A citizen could stand before peers and speak. The sense that law should be open and known helped ordinary people trust the system more, even if the law was not equal for all at first. As Rome grew richer and fought more wars, the political web had to stretch and change. New lands meant new peoples, new treasures, and new questions about who could vote, who paid taxes, and who became citizens. Politics adapted slowly. Laws were made, new offices created, and old customs adjusted. Each change carried comfort and worry. People found security in familiar rituals, but also curiosity about new possibilities. In the evenings, when debates cooled and lamps glowed, Romans returned to small comforts. They dined with friends, walked under the stars, and listened to music or poetry. These domestic moments reminded them that politics served a life beyond laws and offices. It served families, meals, and the quiet human needs that make a city worth living in. That gentle truth kept many Romans rooted in the daily work of living, even as their leaders argued about the future. As this chapter ends, think of the Forum at dusk. Low voices in shared spaces, the hush of lamps, and the steady idea that no single man should hold all power forever. The Republic was an experiment in shared rule, full of care, conflict, and craft. It built a system that could listen and change, even if not always swiftly or fairly. In the next chapter, we will step away from the Forum and follow the steady march of Roman soldiers, the legions, and see how Rome's might on the road and the battlefield shaped its politics and its peace. Chapter 4. Roman Military. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a slow drum beat on a morning plain. The sound is steady, regular, like a great heartbeat that moves men in step. A line of soldiers forms beneath a pale sky, shields rounded like small hills, spears tucked close, sandals whispering on the earth. This is the Roman legion in motion, not only a fighting force, but a living machine made of habit, training, tools, and the quiet trust between men who stand shoulder to shoulder. In this chapter, we will walk beside those soldiers, listen to their orders, and learn how their discipline and craft built a world that stretched from one sea to another. We will stay calm as we move, letting each detail settle like a soft stone in a river. The Roman army was first and always a people's army. In the early days, citizens were called from their fields to carry shield and spear for a season, then returned to plow and harvest. Over time, as Rome fought more wars and needed more constant force, the army became more organized and professional. The basic unit was the legion, a body of heavy infantry trained to move and fight as one. A legion was not simply a mob of men. It was a community with rules, rank, and a clear way of doing things. Training mattered. Young recruits learned to march long days, to hold shields tightly so the line did not break, to throw short spears with aim, and to work as a single body. They learned signals and responded to officers with quick obedience. This steady practice made their movements quiet and sure, like a rope pulled taut. Discipline was the gentle backbone of Roman military strength. A centurion, a middle-ranking officer who walked among the ranks, kept men in order. He was both stern and close to the soldiers' daily lives. Centurions ate with their men, fixed their gear, and expected work done well. In return, soldiers were loyal. Their trust grew from shared hardship, long marches in rain, cold nights in camp, the small comforts of bread and warmed wine when food could be made. These bonds were not made by force alone, but by the simple habits of life together. A well-ordered camp was like a small city, tents arranged in neat rows, streets cut between lines, latrines and kitchens placed with care. The army's life had its own quiet rhythms, polishing armor, maintaining tools, rehearsing maneuvers, and listening to tales by the campfire. These routines became a kind of calm music that steadied men in the face of danger. Tactics were practical and flexible. Roman soldiers fought best in formation. The shield wall was a simple, powerful idea. Men standing close, shields overlapping, moving as a single surface. The gladius, a short stabbing sword, was effective in tight ranks where pushing and thrusting mattered most. For throwing, soldiers carried pila, heavy javelins designed to bend on impact so they could not be thrown back. These simple choices in weapons and training made the legion a force that could adapt to hills, open plains, and close streets. When the line held, courage spread. When the line broke, fear did the same. The quiet trust of shared formation was thus both a tactic and a source of calm in battle. Roman commanders also knew how to change their army. When Rome faced the fast-moving cavalry of other peoples or the war elephants of distant lands, they adapted. They added light troops for scouting and used siege machines when walls were strong. The army included engineers who could build bridges and forts, carpenters who could mend wagons, and medics who could tend wounds. This mixture of skills meant that the Roman force was not only about fighting, but about making war manageable. Building roads for movement, clearing water supplies, and stocking grain for long campaigns. The care given to logistics, the slow work of moving supplies and planning marches, is one reason Rome's armies could stay in the field so long. Think of logistics as the unseen hand that kept the lamp lit during long nights on foreign soil. Some wars shaped Rome forever. The long struggle with Carthage, the Punic Wars, stretched across decades and seas. One famous general, Scipio Africanus, used both bold action and patient planning to defeat a great enemy in North Africa. Across rivers and hills, campaign after campaign taught Rome that naval power mattered as much as land power. At sea, Romans learned to link ships with temporary bridges so soldiers could board enemy vessels and fight in hand-to-hand style. This was an invention of necessity, the calm creativity that comes when people must solve a hard problem. Another great moment was the conquest of Gaul by Julius Caesar. Marching through misty rivers and deep woods, Caesar's legions learned to live off the land and to build fortified camps each night. Their efficiency in setting defenses, making roads, and moving quickly gave them an edge. The books Caesar wrote afterward, in quiet, clear sentences, show how planning and careful report-making were part of military success. Yet with power came change. As leaders grew famous, their armies could become loyal to a man more than to the republic. This quiet shift planted seeds for larger political changes that we will meet in later chapters. Not every victory was simple. In the forests of Germania, a single defeat at Teutoburg Forest left a deep, slow echo. There, Roman formations were ambushed in difficult ground, and whole legions were lost. The lesson was humble. Terrain, surprise, and the right kind of resistance could undo even a well-drilled army. This moment taught Rome to be cautious in some regions, to build stronger lines of forts, and to think differently about where to hold the frontier. It showed that even great power must listen to the land. Sieges were another art. When cities had high walls, Romans did not simply rush forward. They built machines and took time. Towers, catapults, and battering rams arrived slowly, like careful hands, and miners tunneled under walls when needed. The siege was patient work, weeks of moving earth, testing materials, and waiting for a chance. This patience often led to calmer outcomes. A city might surrender when food ran low, or its defenders might agree to terms to spare lives. The careful decisions in sieges reveal that war could be a grim cooperation between forces in which human lives were weighed against stubborn pride and the need for survival. The Navy deserves a quiet moment because water carried more than ships. It carried trade, people, and ideas. Rome's control of seas meant grain shipments reached the city and merchants could travel. A calm harbor with lined ships is as much a sign of security as a quiet camp. Naval strength kept supply lines open and allowed Rome to project power across long distances. When the sea was steady and trade flowed, life in the city became calmer. When storms or piracy rose, anxiety spread. The military shaped society long after battles ended. Veterans received land and sometimes settled far from Rome. These settlements became seeds of Roman culture in distant corners. Towns grew with Roman roads, baths, and forums, and local people learned Latin and Roman customs. The roads themselves were a product of military need. Engineers built straight, durable roads to move troops quickly. Over time, these same roads eased trade, carried letters, and linked families. The quiet work of paving stone changed daily life as surely as any law. Medical care in the army was simple but surprisingly effective. Field medics learned to clean wounds, set bones, and use herbal remedies. A clean camp with good hygiene kept disease lower and men healthier. This everyday care saved lives and kept units ready. The gentle attention of a medic tending a wound by lamplight was another unspoken form of courage. There are quiet human stories among these arms and armor. Imagine a young recruit learning to shorten a spear stroke, laughing with a comrade as they practice, or an old centurion tightening a sandal strap and telling a tale of a long-ago campaign. Such small scenes remind us that armies are communities, full of songs, jokes, shared bread, and the warmth of simple human care. Those memories followed men home and shaped how families lived. As we end this chapter, keep a small curiosity for how the military and politics speak to one another. Soldiers won lands and riches. Those gains changed the city's wealth, fed markets, and raised new questions about citizenship and law. In the next chapters, we will move from camps and battlefields into the quieter streets and homes of Rome, how people lived in towns, what children played with, how markets smelled at dawn, and how the arts and entertainments shaped daily life. For now, picture a legion at dusk, rows of standards glinting in low light, men sharing a simple stew, and the slow song of a distant river. The discipline and care you felt here were the same forces that built roads, settled veterans, and left a calm but deep mark across many lands. Chapter 5. Daily Life and Culture. Imagine a slow morning in a Roman street. The sky is pale, the air cool, and the city wakes in small, gentle ways. Window shutters open, A baker lifts a tray of warm bread. A pot of porridge bubbles on a low fire. The sound of water from a fountain and the creak of a cartwheel mix with low voices. In this chapter, we will walk quietly through the everyday world of Rome. We will meet the people who made the city hum: families, craftsmen, children, and the many hands that kept life moving. We will look with soft attention at how people lived, what they ate, how they dressed, and how the city felt in the ordinary hours between dawn and dusk. Life in Rome was full of layers. At the top were wealthy families who lived in roomy homes with inner gardens, cool rooms, and painted walls. They owned land in the countryside, had many servants, and held dinners that lasted late into the night. Their houses had small courtyards where plants grew and rooms that faced inward to keep the heat out. These homes could be quiet havens, filled with woven rugs, soft cushions, and lamps that made a warm glow at evening. Most people lived more simply. A large number of Romans lived in tall, narrow apartment blocks called insulae. These buildings had shops on the ground floor and rooms above where families lived. The higher you went, the cheaper and smaller the rooms became. Life in an insula was close and noisy. Neighbors leaned out of windows to speak. Children played in the lane below, and cooks burned wood in small stoves that made the air smoky sometimes. These buildings were full of life. The laughter of children, the calls of street sellers, and the steady rhythm of daily chores. The sounds of the city changed with the day. In the morning, market stalls filled with the colors of fruit, fresh fish, and baskets of vegetables. Fishmongers called out their catch, and bakers handed warm loaves to customers. As the sun climbed, some people went to work in workshops where potters spun clay and blacksmiths struck metal on anvils. Craftsmen worked with careful hands, shaping tools, bowls, and jewelry. These small shops were places of skill and quiet pride. A potter testing the lip of a cup, a weaver smoothing threads, a mason smoothing mortar between stones. Food in Rome was simple and honest. A usual meal might be a bowl of porridge or bread with olives and some cheese. Many people drank watered wine as a safe drink. For special days, families might gather for a larger meal with meat, vegetables, and sweet fruits. Garum, a strong fish sauce, flavored many dishes and was used like we use salt. Markets brought food from near and far, grain from fields, olive oil pressed from groves, and sometimes spices that traveled long ways. Food was not only fuel, it was a way to share time, stories, and comfort with others. Clothes told a story about a person. Many men wore a tunic, a simple garment that reached the knees. Wealthy men might wrap a toga, a long flowing cloth for public life. Women wore stolas or similar gowns, often with jewelry and pins to hold hair in place. Hairstyles changed with fashion, and in the warm months, people favored light fabrics. Clothing mattered because it showed rank, role, and sometimes mood. A clean, well-kept tunic spoke of care. A faded, patched cloak spoke of hard work. Family was the center of daily life. The household was led by the paterfamilias, the elder who made decisions and looked after property. Families ate together, shared work, and taught children what they needed to know. Education often began at home. Children learned practical skills, stories, and basic reading. Some boys and girls learned more from tutors or in small schools. Play was important too. Children played with dolls, small wooden animals, and simple board games. The laughter of a child running through a courtyard was a gentle, human sound that echoed across centuries. Religion was woven into daily acts. Small shrines and household altars held images and tokens. Each morning, families might offer a small gift of food to their household spirits for protection and health. Public rituals marked the year, festivals that brought music, processions, and communal feasts. The rhythm of ritual gave people times to pause, to remember, and to gather. Religious life offered comfort and a sense that each person belonged to a world larger than themselves. Baths were among the most soothing parts of Roman daily life. Public baths were not only places to wash, they were social centers. Men and women of different ranks came to steam rooms, warm pools, and cold dips. People met friends, discussed news, and relaxed after work. Baths had pools, exercise yards, and spaces for rest. The gentle sound of water, the hiss of steam, and the steady low voices created a calm space where worries could be eased for a while. Work and craft filled days with purpose. Farmers tended fields, watched olive trees sway, and collected grain at harvest. In the city, skilled workers shaped the goods people needed. Tile makers, shoemakers, carpenters, and bakers all practiced trades passed down through families. Many jobs required patience and care. A potter learned to feel the clay with skill. A mason learned how to fit stones, so buildings stood for years. This steady attention to craft created a comfort. When a bowl was well made, or a road well laid, it made life easier and safer. Slavery was also part of daily life, and it shaped the rhythm of homes and workshops. Some households had many slaves who cooked, cleaned, and cared for children. Others had few. Slaves came from different places and had many tasks. Tutors for children, skilled artisans, or laborers in the fields. Their lives were varied. Some found ways to save money and gain freedom, becoming freedmen who then lived as citizens with certain rights. The presence of slavery is a quiet, difficult truth in Rome. It was part of life, tied to the economy and social order, and it affected the lives of many people in deep ways. Markets were lively spaces where goods and news came together. A market was a place to trade not only food, but ideas. Travelers brought stories, fabrics, and small objects from distant lands. Traders shouted in many tongues, and merchants counted coins with careful hands. Coins themselves carried images, emperors, gods, or symbols that told a story about who was in charge. The economy in the city depended on these small exchanges: a baker selling bread, a potter selling jars, and a farmer selling grain. These tiny acts sustained whole households. Health and medicine were simple and practical. Doctors used herbs, poultices, and basic surgery. They washed wounds, set broken bones, and gave advice on diet and exercise. Public health also mattered. Aqueducts brought fresh water, and sewers helped carry away waste. These systems made life cleaner and helped reduce disease in crowded places. Simple acts like boiling water, draining stagnant pools, and keeping streets swept made a tangible difference in how people felt day to day. Entertainment and festivals were gentle breaks from work. People watched plays in open theaters, cheered at chariot races in the Circus Maximus, and watched gladiators in the amphitheater. These events were loud and joyful, but they also helped bind the community. Festivals like Saturnalia brought a time of playfulness when social rules relaxed and people gave small gifts. Music and dance filled the air, and the city felt alive with shared pleasure. Love and marriage were part of ordinary life, quiet and deep. Families arranged many marriages for alliances, but there was also room for affection and care. People wrote letters, composed small poems and kept tokens of love. Funerals were important ways to remember the dead. They brought people together for speeches, processions, and shared meals to honor those who had passed. Memory was a gentle thread that tied generations together. As the day ends, picture a small apartment with a low lamp, a family sharing a bowl of soup, someone telling a short tale, and children falling asleep to the sound of a distant fountain. The city, which felt busy and warm by day, settles into a soft hush. Night brings fewer carts and more stars, and the many small lives of Rome rest until morning. Before we drift into the next chapter, keep a gentle thought. Daily life is the quiet heart of history. Great battles and famous names often get the loudest telling, but it is in the ordinary hours, the baker's early heat, the potter's steady wheel, the child's laughing game, that a civilization truly lives. Later, we will move into Roman entertainment and festivals to feel how joy and spectacle fit into this daily rhythm, and we will hear a story that shows how one day of play could change public feeling in a surprising way. Stay with me. The next chapter will bring bright sounds and slow drums that drew whole crowds together. Chapter 6. Roman entertainment. Imagine a warm afternoon where the heat lies soft on marble and stone, and people move like slow shadows toward a great open space. Children skip at the edges, vendors carry cool drinks, and the city hums with a gentle excitement that is more like expectation than noise. This is the mood of Roman entertainment. Public life woven with moments made for wonder, for laughter, for collective sighs. In this chapter, we will sit together in those crowded places and feel how spectacle, sport, and festival gave shape to the city's heart. We will breathe in the smells, hear the calls, and follow the slow patterns that let a whole people share a single hour of attention. First, picture the amphitheater. A ring of stone rises like a small hill. Rows of seats circle an open floor. The building itself seems calm and patient, waiting like a great machine for life to move through it. On certain days, that quiet wakes to a strong rhythm. Drums count out a pace. Trumpets call. People lean forward as figures step into the sand. Gladiators, who trained in special schools, move like careful performers and fighters at once. Their life was one of hard practice, plain food, and close companionship. Many were slaves or prisoners, but some chose the life willingly, seeking honor, fame, or simply a steady roof over their heads. They learned how to use different weapons and how to fight in styles that would please the crowd. Some fought with heavy shields and short swords. Others moved more lightly, carrying nets and tridents that made their fights feel like a choreographed dance. The crowd watched, gasped, and sometimes wept. For many, the spectacle offered a safe way to feel fear and courage side by side, without leaving the warmth of the city. There was a human softness behind these contests. Gladiators were not only fighters, they had names, friends, and stories. In the quiet between bouts, they tended wounds, shared bread, and wrote brief messages to loved ones. The arena could be brutal, but it also created its own small world of fame and loyalty. A successful fighter might be offered freedom, a small house, or the cheers of thousands. The crowd loved stories. The underdog who rose through hardship, the veteran finally yielding to age, the last brave stand that made people hold their breath. These moments pulled families and strangers together in a common emotion that felt almost like belonging. Move now in the mind to an even larger stage, the Circus Maximus. Imagine a valley-long track flanked by packed seating, banners fluttering, and color everywhere. Chariot racing was the city's great wild pulse. 4-horse chariots flashed around the track, drivers leaning low, reins tight, eyes sharp as they fought for position. The speed was dangerous, the turns tight, and the crashes, sudden and terrible, made the crowd hold its breath. Fans cheered for teams, not just drivers. Groups took colors and names like clubs. They painted their banners, wore scarves, and watched the races as if they were part of a family. Rivalries were warm and fierce. A victory felt like a harvest, a loss like a small grief shared by many. Chariot racing gave people a place to pour their energy, to shout, to hope, and sometimes to grieve together when a crash took a life. Theater offered a softer pleasure. In open-air theaters, plays unfolded in measured tones. Actors using masks and broad gestures told stories of love, of trickery, of gods walking among people. Tragedy made hearts ache and think. Comedy made shoulders loosen and laughter ripple like soft waves. Plays were part of the city's rhythm. They taught morals, mocked small follies, and let listeners feel the comfort of a shared joke. On religious days, dramatic performances tied life to ritual, reminding people of old stories and old gods in ways that felt both safe and moving. Festivals were the city's deep exhale. They arrived like gentle holidays that changed how people treated the day. Markets might close, normal rules relax, and music fill the air. Saturnalia, for example, was a time when order bent a little. Gifts were exchanged, feasts shared, and the city laughed in a looser way. During such times, even the strictest families allowed small reversals of role. Masters joked more with servants, people wore brighter clothes, and mischief took a friendly shape. These pauses brought relief from the long work of life and offered everyone a chance to step out of ordinary tasks and be part of something larger. The relief itself became a kind of medicine for the city's spirit. Public games often served more than pleasure. Emperors and public officials used spectacles to mark important events, a triumph after a victory, an opening of a new building, or a funeral that asked for public memory. Large games could include mock sea battles flooded into specially prepared basins, elaborate processions with music and acting, and hunts where trained animals moved across the arena. These displays were expensive and took careful preparation. The planning itself was like a small art. Carpenters, engineers, musicians, and cooks all working together like the parts of an orchestra. The result was a shared moment that many remembered for a long time. Behind this public life, there was always the hum of small work. Venues needed upkeep, tickets or places needed arranging, and vendors walked with cool drinks and sweet cakes. Food stalls lined the streets on festival days, selling seeds, dried fruits, and small fried treats. People moved slowly to their seats, wrapped in cloaks when the evening air cooled, leaning on low cushions. The sound of 1,000 voices made a soft background that felt alive, but not wild. In these crowds, strangers could stand side by side and feel the comfort of a single shared story. Entertainment also had its shadow. Spectacles could numb if offered too often, to the point where rulers used them to distract from hard questions. The phrase about bread and games reflects a gentle worry that comfort and spectacle could soothe people into accepting bad laws or poor leadership. This was not always the case, but it was a real risk. When pleasure replaces conversation, a city becomes quieter about its troubles. Yet even then, festivals and shows often contained subtle messages. Comedies might mock greed, tragedies might show the cost of power. In small ways, theater and spectacle could raise a thought about justice, pride, or kindness. There are tender personal stories held in these places. Imagine an old woman who loved to sit by the amphitheater gate and watch young fighters enter, remembering her son who once trained there. Imagine two young lovers stealing time at the back of a theater, sharing a piece of fruit and a laugh. Imagine a craftsman who paid for his child's education from the small coins he saved after a public game. These small threads show that entertainment was not only the ruler's stage, but the people's life, full of small joys and private griefs. As this chapter closes, think of a slow night after a day of games. Banners folded, fires low, the city quieting like a soft tide. People walk home with pockets lighter and hearts full of stories to tell. The images of the day settle like gentle paints behind the eyes. The flash of a chariot, the harsh clang of a short sword, the ripple of laughter from a compline of friends. Entertainment in Rome was a mirror. It showed the city how it loved, how it feared, and how it remembered. It brought comfort, excitement, and a rhythm to life that helped people sleep a little easier that night. In the next chapter, we will move inward to religion, myth, and the quiet ways Romans sought meaning. We will listen to the soft voice of ritual, the slow reading of omens, and the stories of gods who walked close to human life. Stay with me. There are gentle surprises ahead that will tie what people loved to what they feared and what they prayed for. Chapter 7. Religion and Mythology. Imagine a quiet morning when the city still smells of damp stone and warm bread, and a small altar glows with the soft light of an oil lamp. A family gathers, not in a loud way, but with a calm reverence. One hand gently sets a small bowl of grain beside a carved image. The eldest says a short blessing, and the youngest watches closely, learning the words by the slow cadence of voice and breath. This gentle moment is the shape of Roman religion for many people, private, close, and woven into ordinary life. Religion in Rome was wide and lived. It was not one tidy belief, but many practices and stories layered together. Some people spoke to great gods who sat in the sky. Others asked favor from small spirits who watched over a hearth or a field. Temples rose on hills with columns and steps, and at the same time, tiny household shrines held a family's hopes. This mix gave people many ways to feel connected to the world around them. Roman gods often wore human faces and human wants. They felt like neighbors who did mighty things. Jupiter was a figure of power and thunder, the father of gods and men. Mars was the god of war, but also of the strength that farmers used to turn the soil. Venus was love and beauty, but also the simple warmth that binds families. These gods were both grand and familiar. People pictured them walking close to human life, listening if a prayer was asked with care. Stories mattered. Myths were told in a calm tone, not to frighten, but to explain and to teach small truths. The tale of Aeneas, for example, was a story many Romans loved. Aeneas was said to have wandered after great destruction, carrying his household gods, listening to gods who guided him to a new home. In the telling, Aeneas became a symbol of endurance, a figure who kept his family's spirit alive through travel and loss. These kinds of stories helped people feel that their city grew from acts of care and hope, not only from conquest or chance. Ritual was the breath of religion. People believed that correct words and careful gestures mattered. A priest or a head of household would speak precise phrases, pour offerings, or touch a flame in ways that had been repeated for years. The small details, pouring wine in a certain way, turning a bowl in a certain direction, made the gods more likely to listen. This attention to form was not empty. It gave comfort. When the ritual was done right, people felt peace, as if a knot in the chest loosened and the day could begin. One of the softest and most striking parts of Roman religion was augury, the reading of signs. Not by looking for secret codes, but by watching birds, clouds, or lightning and listening for what these signs might say. A priest would watch a flight pattern, count a call, or note how a bird landed. The reading was slow and careful. It taught people to pause and see the world as a book of small messages. Augury made life feel less random. It gave people a way to sense a larger order and to time their actions with gentle care. The Vestal Virgins hold a place in many minds because their life was both public and private, simple and strange. These women tended a sacred fire that was said to protect the city. The flame was kept burning in a quiet chamber, and their duty was constant. Their lives were bound to this care. They learned to speak calmly in public and to keep strict habits in private. Respect for them was high, and their role shows how Roman religion could give certain practices a slow and lasting power over community life. The idea of tending a steady flame speaks deeply to the human need for something constant in a world of change. Rituals tied people to the seasons and to life's passages. Weddings followed patterns that blessed the union. Funerals were full of careful rites that eased the sorrow and kept memory safe. Festivals marked planting and harvest, a time to rest and to gather. The rhythm of the year, with its quiet pauses and bright days, made time itself feel whole. People moved with the calendar, and those markers helped shape a sense of belonging. Religion was also a place of meeting and mixing. As Rome grew, it met many other peoples with their own gods and rites. Greek myths and images walked into Roman life like old friends. Egyptian gods, with their strange animals and deep rituals, drew interest. Instead of pushing these others away, Rome often welcomed them, making room in temples or building new shrines. The result was a religious life that felt broad and open. People could adopt new gods without losing their old ones, layering beliefs like thin cloths that added warmth. This openness had gentle, practical reasons. When people in far lands honored a Roman idea or added a new god to a local temple, it helped tie communities together. A soldier in a distant province who could visit a little temple and feel the comfort of a familiar rite would feel less alone. Trade, marriage, and local friendships all found small solace when religious life could be shared. Religion became a kind of common language that let many people live under the same sky. There were also moments when faith and politics met softly. Leaders used religion to show care for the city and to mark important changes. A new emperor could restore a temple, sponsor festivals, or start new rituals that honored the state and its people. This blending shows that religion could comfort and also guide public life. When leaders acted with religious care, the city felt steadier. When they used faith only for power, people sometimes felt a quiet unease. we should not forget the small human acts within religious life. A farmer offering the first grain of harvest did so with a trembling hand and a soft hope for safety. A sailor who returned from a dangerous sea voyage placed a small token at a shrine and wept with relief. A mother praying for a sick child sat by a lamp and whispered the name of a guardian spirit. These private moments remind us that religion was not only about doctrine or ceremony, it was about people trying to hold one another safe. There were also strange and tender customs. Some people wrote small curses on thin sheets and put them in little hollow objects, hoping to send trouble away. Others wrote prayers on small tablets and left them at temple steps. These acts look odd to us now, but they are simple ways people tried to shape small unknowns in life. Illness, a bad harvest, a quarrel. The gestures are human in their earnestness and reveal how much people wanted to nudge chance toward kindness. As the city changed, new faiths arrived and moved the landscape of belief. Some were private and small, others grew large and became part of public life. This slow turning of religious ideas did not happen quickly. It was like a river changing course over years. Small shifts, some quiet decisions, a gradual reweaving of what people held sacred. Before we move on, allow a small, quiet thought. Religion in Rome was not a single story, but a weave of many. It comforted, guided, and joined people across space and time. It soothed the soul, gave shape to joy and grief, and created rituals that helped people live together. In the next chapter, we will walk through the stones of Roman achievement: bridges, baths, arches, and roads. We will see how the same careful attention that men gave to ritual was also given to concrete and mortar, to building things that would last. Chapter 8: Engineering and Innovation. Close your eyes and picture a slow river of stone. Blocks fit together, water runs where it must, and an arched bridge spans the gap like a patient hand. This steady image is the heart of Roman engineering: careful, practical, and quietly bold. Romans built to last, and they built to make life easier. In this chapter, we will move gently through their bridges and roads, their baths and aqueducts, their clever mixes of stone and sand, and the small devices and simple rules that made whole cities work. We will walk slowly over a paved road, feel the cool air of a great bathhouse, and listen to the soft drip of water from a high aqueduct. The tone is calm, the details are clear, and each new idea will help us see how skill and care shaped everyday life. Think first of roads. Imagine a thin ribbon of stone running straight across hills and plains, lined with low stones to keep water from pooling, and with milestones marking the way. Roman roads were made in layers, not just laid on the earth. Workers dug down to firm ground, then placed large stones as a base, smaller stones and sand above, and finally a hard wearing surface of carefully fit paving stones. This structure made roads strong against rain and heavy carts. Roads were measured and kept straight when possible. Roman surveyors used simple tools and took many small measurements so the line would hold. The result was a network that linked towns, ports, and farms. For people in the city, these roads meant grain could arrive from distant fields, traders could cross hills, and messages could travel fast. For soldiers, roads meant that legions could march with steady, predictable speed. The quiet order of a straight road changed how a whole region moved. Now picture aqueducts, long lines of arches carrying water from springs on distant hills into the heart of a city. The sound of falling water as it hits a settling tank is like a soft song. Aqueducts worked by the simplest of rules. Water flows downhill. Engineers planned a small, steady slope across miles, so the stream would move without rushing and without stopping. Where the land dipped, they built arches. Where it rose, they tunneled. The channels led to high tanks, and from there to fountains, baths, and private houses. Fresh water made life safer. Children could play near fountains, baths could fill warm pools, and bakers could mix dough without worry. The steady flow of water was a kind of comfort, an unseen servant that kept the city clean, fed the mills, and made gardens green. The Romans knew how to make materials in new ways. One quiet wonder is their concrete. They mixed lime with a special kind of ash and small stones to make a putty that would harden into rock. This mix could be shaped, poured into forms, and left to set. Builders used it to make long vaults and domes that could cover large spaces without many internal supports. Think of a bath hall with a high curved roof and steam rising beneath. This was possible because of the strength and flexibility of this concrete. The material even worked underwater when mixed with certain volcanic ash, so people could build piers and harbors. This quiet chemistry changed architecture. It freed builders from only using stone blocks and let them make new forms that were strong and roomy. The great buildings show this skill. Imagine a circular temple with a wide bowl of a roof and a round hole at the top that lets the sky in. Light falls through that opening and moves slowly across the floor like a timekeeper. This kind of dome required careful planning, a thick base, thinner upper layers, and sometimes lightning holes in the structure so the weight was less. The dome is both shelter and symbol. Inside, the air feels cool and calm. These spaces were made to hold people, to echo words, and to keep the small ceremonies of the city safe from weather and noise. Bridges were another simple triumph. Instead of trying to place a long beam across a river, Roman builders set many small arches side by side. Each arch passed weight down into sturdy piers sunk into the riverbed. The shape of the arch spreads the load and makes a bridge that can last a long time. Builders used scaffolding and wooden frames to shape an arch, then removed the wood when the stones fit. The slow work of placing each stone in the right place was like making a sentence, one word at a time, until a full meaning stood solid and strong. Roman baths show how engineering met comfort. Baths were not only rooms with water, they were complex systems with heating, water supply, and careful cleaning. Under the floors, stoves would warm the air and send heat through hollow tiles so rooms could be warm without open fires. Pools had different temperatures, so a visitor could move from warm to cool. Stones were polished smooth. Pools lined with tile held water that was kept changing. The careful control of temperature and water made the baths places of calm and social life. People talked, exercised, read, and relaxed. The hum of conversation and the hiss of steam made the place feel like a warm, living room for the whole city. Small tools mattered too. Surveyors used simple wooden frames to draw right angles and to keep lines straight. Carpenters used clamps and rulers to make doors that closed cleanly. Masons smoothed mortar with wooden floats, and plasterers polished walls so paint would hold. These daily acts of craft added up into great works. One well-made arch meant many people's paths were safe for years. The military used these same engineering skills. When legions camped on new ground, they built temporary forts with ditches, palisades, and gateways. These camps were laid out with care, streets between tents, a central command area, and places for supplies. Soldiers could set up and break camp with practiced moves. On longer campaigns, engineers built temporary bridges across rivers so troops could cross. There's a quiet, famous example of this skill. Once, an army built a bridge across a wide river in a matter of days, not as a boast, but as a practical way to move men and supplies. The speed and neatness of such work surprised neighbors and kept the army safe. Water systems had a darker and a lighter side. Lead pipes were used to carry water into houses because they were easy to shape and joined well. The secrecy and simplicity of pipework meant that water could be moved inside without breaking walls. But pipework needed care. Leaks could cause damp, and maintenance was a constant job. Sewers, on the other hand, like a deep throat under the city, carried away waste and rain. The largest of these sewers moved water under the streets into the river. The presence of good drainage made life healthier and the streets cleaner, and this small, hidden work made the public space more pleasant. Urban planning also showed calm order. In many Roman towns, streets were arranged in simple right-angle grids, with a main east-west street and a main north-south street meeting near the center. Markets, temples, and public spaces clustered close by. This pattern made it easy to find a road and to plan new buildings. When a town was founded as a colony, the plan often repeated itself, a careful copy that made life organized and calm. The form helped trade, allowed parades to move, and gave people a strong sense of place. There are human stories inside these stones. Imagine a master mason who stood at the scaffolding and watched as the last stone of an arch was lowered. He touched the joint, nodded, and let out a small breath of relief. Or a young engineer who checked a slope at dawn, then sat to drink warm wine as the sun rose, pleased at a line that held steady across miles. These small satisfactions, a road that stayed firm through winter rain, an aqueduct that did not leak, were the quiet triumphs of Roman life. As we end this chapter, think of the city at dusk, lit by lamps that hang over smooth streets. Bridges glow faintly over black water, and in the distance a dome stands shaped against the sky. Engineering in Rome was not only skill with stone and mortar, it was care for daily comfort, a desire to shape the world so that people could live safer, cleaner, and with more ease. In the next chapter, we will step into darker and brighter moments. Scandals that shook the palace, strange tales of emperors, and the quiet human costs behind great displays of power. Hold that thought gently. There are stories ahead that will make you lean in, even as you relax. Chapter 9: Scandal and Sensation. Picture a warm night in the city, lamps guttering along a quiet street, when a single rumor slips from one ear to another like a soft wind. That whisper is the start of scandal. In Rome, as in any great city, the private life of powerful people often spilled into public view, and the things that shocked or thrilled the crowd became part of the city's slow, persistent story. In this chapter, we will sit with those moments, stories of excess and cruelty, of secret plots and sudden deaths, of fires and sickness, and we will do so in a calm, steady voice. These events could be loud in their moment, but they teach us how fragile honor can be and how small choices ripple across a whole society. Imagine the palace lit up at night, long tables groaning with food, singers moving like shadows between guests. Some emperors loved to host in a way that dazzled the mind. Their banquets were not just meals, but performances, rare spices, roasted birds, and dishes arranged like tiny landscapes. Guests ate slowly, conversed in low tones, and watched artistry unfold on plates as if the food were another kind of story. In these rooms, favor could be won or lost by a line of praise, a small compliment, or a correctly timed laugh. Food in that gentle world had the power to lift someone into influence or to push them quietly out. There was also the darker side of such life. Tales of emperors who seemed to forget restraint became the city's favorite gossip. Some rulers indulged in extravagance, building lavish houses, throwing grand games, or collecting luxuries from distant lands. Their spending could appear as care for the people, but more often it highlighted a widening gap between palace and street. When rulers prioritized display over steady governance, people felt the loss in small, practical ways: higher taxes, less grain in the market, or delayed repairs to streets and aqueducts. The cost of spectacle was real, and the city felt it like a slow chill. Alongside spectacle came stories of cruelty, some real and some shaped by rumor. Power can harden a heart or make it careless. Executions, banishments, and confiscations sometimes followed private grudges or political rivalry. The line between justice and revenge could become thin. Secret trials in shadowy rooms, decisions handed down by a frightened court, and sudden disappearances of once famous figures created a low hum of fear. People learned to be careful with flattery and cautious with criticism. A whispered joke about a powerful man could be dangerous, and this quiet danger shaped how folk spoke in the market and how writers chose their words. Assassination was one of the most dramatic forms of scandal. A ruler who seemed untouchable could fall in a single morning. The killing of leaders could come from a small knot of conspirators who believed a city or a system was being harmed. These acts were violent, yes, but they also carried a political meaning, a message that power could not stand unexamined. Sometimes these deaths led to a calmer path and reform. Other times they opened a door to chaos as rivals and guards fought to name the next leader. The sudden end of a public life made the whole city breathe in and out with a different rhythm. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own body of soldiers, had a quiet and heavy influence. They protected the palace, but their closeness to power sometimes let them shape who became ruler. At moments of weakness, the guard could be a kingmaker, supporting one man over another, or even asking for rewards in return for loyalty. This closeness brought both safety and a new kind of tension. The presence of armed men near the throne made the palace a place where whispers could become plans, and plans could become force. Fires were another kind of scandal, often sudden and terrifying. The city's tall apartment blocks, crowded markets, and wooden roofs made fire a constant fear. A single spark from a cooking lamp could sweep through narrow lanes and leave whole districts blackened. When a great fire struck, people pointed to causes and looked for someone to blame. Sometimes a leader was accused of failing to act, sometimes of acting wrongly. One great fire became a story people told for years, a night when whole neighborhoods were lost, and when the way the ruler responded, or was said to have responded, changed public trust. Fires exposed the fragility of life in a packed city and the need for careful planning and swift help. Plagues and disease were soft, cruel forces that moved quietly through the streets. They did not shout, they crept. A cough, a fever, then the slow tolling of loss. Plagues tested the city's strength, its food supplies, and its doctors. When illness spread, markets could thin, and fear could tighten social life. People turned to medicines, to healers, and to priests. Sometimes they blamed strangers or certain groups, and those moments of fear could cause injustice. Yet plagues also brought out care, neighbors feeding neighbors, physicians working by lamplight, and the calm bravery of those who tended the sick. Such times taught the city hard lessons about public health and the quiet importance of clean water, good sewer systems, and steady food stores. Scandals often involved money too. Theft, bribery, and greed could pull the curtain aside and show how deep the need for coins ran. Officials could take small gifts that became large favors. Judges could be swayed by hidden payments. Merchants could hoard grain to raise prices in lean months. The slow creep of corruption wore at trust. People learned to be more cautious in business and more careful whom they trusted. Yet local communities also found ways to respond. Public shame, legal suits, and civic pressure could bring reform. Scandal created talk, and talk could lead to change. Sex and family life were also part of the city's gossip. Affairs, arranged marriages, and rumors about private loyalties were the kinds of stories that made neighbors pause and repeat a tale by the fountain. These private affairs could become public scandals when they touched lines of succession or family honor. A family's reputation mattered deeply. A public shame could be a long-lasting wound. Yet within private life, there were also quiet reconciliations, letters of apology, and small acts of kindness that healed rifts slowly. People held together by kinship and care, even when rumor tried to pull them apart. Even scandal had its softer side. Gossip brought people together in a shared story, and in that sharing, they felt a kind of closeness. A market stallholder and a senator might both know the same tale and laugh at the same twist. Scandal, painful as it could be, created common ground where people compared notes and reminded one another of what was right and what was wrong. Sometimes that conversation pushed leaders to mend their ways. Sometimes it simply gave the city a small, shared drama to talk about on long evenings. As we close this chapter, imagine the city at dawn after a night of rumor. People moving cautiously, stories already changing shape in new mouths. A quiet resolve among neighbors to speak plainly about what matters. Scandal and sensation were never just noise. They were signals about what a society valued and feared. They called people to examine power, to demand better, or sometimes to slow down and care for the wounded. In our next chapter, we will turn to the economy, the markets, the traders, the coins that traveled far, and the ships that creaked in the harbor. We will see how these small exchanges kept a big city alive, and how trade knitted many lands into one slow, steady story. Chapter 10: Economics and Trade. If you close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing in the heart of ancient Rome, what would you hear? Not the sound of battle or cheering crowds in the Colosseum, but the steady hum of trade, the rhythm of a city that thrived on movement, exchange, and labor. You would hear merchants calling out their prices, the clatter of coins, the low rumble of carts carrying goods from the countryside, and the voices of people bargaining in a dozen different languages. The economy of Rome was not just numbers and wealth. It was the heartbeat of an empire that stretched from the misty coasts of Britain to the deserts of Arabia. At its height, Rome's economy was vast and remarkably organized for its time. It was built on agriculture, trade, labor, and, in no small part, on the backs of slaves. It connected distant worlds, the spices of India, the gold of Africa, the silks of China, and the grain of Egypt, all passing through Roman hands. Everything had a place, everything had a value, and everything fed into the endless appetite of the capital city, where over 1 million people lived, worked, and dreamed. Let's begin with the foundation: agriculture. For all its grand temples and marble palaces, Rome was, at its core, an agrarian civilization. The countryside was dotted with farms and villas, from small family plots to vast estates called latifundia. These large estates were owned by wealthy senators or noble families and were often worked by hundreds of slaves. They produced olive oil, wine, grains, and livestock, goods that would travel not only to nearby markets, but across the empire's trade routes. The grain supply, in particular, was the lifeblood of the city. Without it, Rome could not feed its enormous population. Every year, fleets of ships sailed from Egypt and North Africa, loaded with grain destined for Rome's harbors at Ostia and Portus. From there, it was carried inland along the Tiber River to the city's warehouses. Grain was so essential that emperors provided it for free to citizens in what was known as the annona, a form of state welfare. A steady grain supply meant peace and contentment. A shortage could spark riots. So vital was this system that a single storm, blocking grain ships at sea, could shake the empire's stability. But Rome's economy did not rest on farming alone. Trade was its lifeline. Imagine, if you will, a Roman harbor at dawn. The sea mist hangs low, and ships creak as sailors shout in Greek, Latin, and Egyptian. Amphorae, large clay jars filled with oil, wine, and fish sauce, are lifted from the holds. The air smells of salt and spice. Exotic animals, ivory, carpets, and jewels are carried ashore. Merchants haggle over prices, and customs officials keep a watchful eye, noting every shipment, every coin exchanged. The Mediterranean Sea was not just water, it was Rome's highway. It connected the empire's farthest corners, making trade swift and relatively safe under the Roman Navy's protection. Roads, too, played a crucial part. "All roads lead to Rome" was not a metaphor, it was a reality. The Romans built over 400,000 kilometers of roads, connecting cities, forts, and ports in a web that tied the empire together. On these roads moved soldiers, officials, and traders, carrying everything from letters to livestock. Now, picture the bustling Roman marketplace, the Forum. It was not just a place to buy or sell, it was a social experience. Citizens gathered to exchange goods, ideas, and news. There were stalls for bread, olives, cheese, fruits, pottery, fabrics, perfumes, and even exotic goods from the East. A person could walk from one end of the market to another and pass goods from half the known world. Chinese silk, for instance, was so rare and precious that senators debated banning it, fearing it made Roman men weak and effeminate. But of course, demand only grew stronger. And then there was the magic of Roman coins: the denarius, the sestertius, the aureus. Coins carried more than monetary value. They carried power. On each coin was the face of the emperor, a daily reminder of who ruled and what Rome stood for. When a new emperor rose to power, his image was stamped on the coins as if to announce his legitimacy to every corner of the empire. Coins made trade possible, but they also told stories of prosperity, conquest, and divine favor. But not all trade was free and fair. A large portion of Rome's economy rested on slavery. Slaves worked the farms, the mines, the workshops, and even the households of the elite. They built the roads, carved the marble, and rowed the ships. Some were educated, serving as teachers, scribes, or accountants, while others toiled in brutal conditions deep underground. Rome's conquests fed the system. Each war brought new captives, who were then sold in sprawling slave markets. For many free citizens, this labor system brought cheap goods and luxury. For the enslaved, it meant a lifetime of service and struggle. Still, the economy's success relied not only on force, but on cooperation. The empire was a network of trust between merchants and buyers, farmers and millers, sailors and soldiers. Even though corruption and greed existed, a sense of order prevailed. Roman law protected contracts and trade rights, and local markets operated under fair standards set by magistrates. In many ways, this structure mirrored what we might think of today as a modern economy, a blend of regulation, opportunity, and ambition. Now imagine a ship sailing from Alexandria to Rome. Its hold is full: grain, papyrus, glass, spices, and jewels. The journey is long and risky. Storms can rise suddenly, pirates lurk in hidden coves, and the ship's crew must trust their charts and the favor of the gods. When the ship finally reaches port, there is a collective sigh of relief. The cargo is unloaded, sold, taxed, and distributed. The profits flow into the city, feeding its industries, paying its workers, and fueling the endless hunger of its people. Every ship that arrived safely was a small victory for the Roman world. Luxury goods, too, played a fascinating role. The Roman elite had a taste for the rare and exotic. They wanted fine silks from China, perfumes from Arabia, pearls from India, and spices from the East. These goods traveled along the fabled Silk Road, a vast network of trade routes that connected Rome to lands thousands of miles away. Caravans moved across deserts and mountains, carrying silk, gems, and spices in exchange for gold and silver. Though few Romans ever saw these distant lands, they touched them through trade, a shimmering thread that tied the empire to the rest of the world. The ports of Ostia, Alexandria, and Carthage became living organisms of trade, ever moving, ever noisy. Each had massive warehouses called horia, where goods were stored under careful watch. In these great buildings, the wealth of nations rested behind wooden doors. Merchants marked their crates, clerks recorded the contents, and guards ensured nothing went missing. It was an early form of organized commerce, sophisticated and efficient. But even the strongest economies falter. Over time, the empire began to strain under its own weight. Wars grew expensive, corruption deepened, and coins were minted with less silver, losing their value. Inflation crept in quietly. Trade routes became more dangerous as the empire's borders weakened. The once busy harbors saw fewer ships. The great markets began to quiet. The economy that had lifted Rome to greatness began to crack, one small fracture at a time. And yet, even in decline, the legacy of Roman trade endured. The roads, ports, and laws they built remained long after the empire fell. They shaped the economies of medieval Europe, and laid the groundwork for modern commerce. The Roman idea that the world could be connected through roads, trade, and trust outlived the empire itself. So, as we picture Rome's economy, we do not see just wealth or numbers. We see human effort, farmers bent over in fields, merchants loading ships, slaves carrying amphorae, and buyers counting coins. Together, they formed the quiet engine that powered an empire for centuries. Now, as we leave the markets behind, let's walk slowly into the next part of our story. We'll explore how Rome's laws, its sense of justice, and its understanding of citizenship held this vast, diverse world together. A civilization's true strength is not only in its riches, but in how it treats its people, and in the rules it leaves behind. Chapter 11: Law and Society. If there is one thing that held the Roman world together, it wasn't just armies or wealth, it was law. For beneath the marble arches, beneath the noise of markets and the glory of the legions, there was an invisible web that bound Rome's citizens together, a web woven from rules, justice, and order. It was the quiet heartbeat of civilization. Roman law wasn't born fully formed. It grew slowly out of daily life, from disputes between neighbors, agreements between merchants, and the unending question of what was fair. In the early days of the Republic, laws were not written down. They were remembered, passed from generation to generation by priests who acted as keepers of tradition. But this made justice uncertain. Ordinary people, the plebeians, grew weary of laws known only by the elite. They wanted clarity, fairness, and transparency. So, around 450 BCE, the Romans did something revolutionary. They wrote their laws down. They were called the 12 Tables. Imagine 12 large bronze tablets placed in the Roman Forum for everyone to see. They contained simple but powerful rules: how to settle debts, what to do in a dispute, how to divide property, and how to punish crimes. For the first time, the law belonged not just to the powerful, but to the people. These laws might seem harsh to us today. Some punished theft or false testimony with death. Others set strict social boundaries. A patrician could not marry a plebeian, for instance. But for the Romans, the 12 Tables were sacred. They represented equality before the law. They gave every citizen a voice, a way to know where they stood in society. Over time, as Rome grew, so did its laws. Judges and magistrates began to interpret these rules in more complex ways. New situations arose as trade expanded, as soldiers conquered new lands, and as foreigners became part of Rome's world. The law adapted, flexible, thoughtful, and remarkably practical. It did not rest on divine authority, but on reason. The Romans believed that the law should serve the community, not just the ruler. This idea that law must reflect justice and not power alone became one of their greatest legacies. Their jurists, the legal scholars of the day, debated endlessly about rights, contracts, and fairness. One of them, Ulpian, once said, "Justice is the constant and perpetual will to give each his due." Simple words, profound meaning. Now let's imagine walking through a Roman courtroom. The air is heavy with anticipation. The judge sits on a raised platform, his expression calm and detached. The accuser and the accused stand before him. There are no lawyers as we know them today, but there are orators, skilled speakers who argue their case with eloquence and precision. Cicero, one of Rome's greatest orators, could sway entire crowds with his voice. He once defended men accused of corruption, conspiracy, and even murder, not with anger or theatrics, but with logic, wit, and persuasion. In Rome, a man's words could be his greatest weapon or his downfall. Justice, however, was not always blind. Class and status often determined one's fate. A wealthy senator might pay a fine for a crime that would send a poor man to the mines or to the cross. Punishments could be severe: execution by beheading, crucifixion, or exile. Prisons were not places of reform. They were holding cells before judgment. Yet, even within this system, there was order. There were clear procedures for trials. Evidence was heard. Witnesses were questioned. Judges were bound by precedent. And the accused, even the lowest citizen, could appeal to higher authorities, sometimes even to the emperor himself. Citizenship was at the heart of it all. To be a Roman citizen was not just a privilege. It was a badge of identity, protection, and pride. A citizen could vote, marry legally, own property, and appeal to the courts. Even in the farthest corners of the empire, citizenship carried power. When a Roman citizen was wronged, it was not just an individual matter. It was an insult to Rome itself. A famous story captures this truth. In the book of Acts, the Apostle Paul, a Roman citizen, was arrested in the city of Philippi. When the local officials learned of his status, they grew fearful and released him immediately, apologizing for having bound a Roman without trial. That was the power of citizenship, a shield backed by the might of an empire. At first, citizenship was exclusive. Only those born in Rome or descended from Roman families could claim it. But as the empire expanded, citizenship became a tool of unity. Soldiers who served faithfully could earn it. Freed slaves, after years of loyalty, could gain it. Entire provinces could be granted citizenship as a reward for their allegiance. In 212 CE, Emperor Caracalla made a historic decision. He granted citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire. It was both a political and a practical move. It unified people under one legal identity, but also increased tax revenue. Still, this vast citizenship did something remarkable. It erased many barriers. A man born in Spain or Syria could one day hold office in Rome. Latin became the language of law, but its spirit, fairness, discipline, and reason spread far beyond the city. Even today, echoes of Roman law live on. When you sign a contract, argue a case in court, or appeal to justice, you are touching ideas first shaped in Rome. The concepts of innocent until proven guilty, equality before the law, and the right to a fair trial all trace their lineage back to Roman thought. Yet Roman justice was not without its darkness. In times of fear or crisis, even Rome abandoned its ideals. During the reigns of emperors like Nero or Domitian, the courts became tools of terror. A single accusation of treason could lead to swift execution. Informants thrived. Senators whispered in fear. The same laws that once protected citizens could now destroy them, depending on who wielded the power. Still, the essence of Roman law, that civilization depends on order, fairness, and written justice, endured. It survived the fall of the empire, carried forward by scholars in Byzantium, and later reborn in medieval Europe. Modern civil law, used by nations around the world, still bears Rome's fingerprints. In the quiet halls of Roman courthouses, beneath the echo of sandals and the rustle of togas, something timeless was born. The belief that no society can last without justice. For the Romans, law was not just a set of rules. It was the soul of their civilization. and as night falls over ancient Rome in our imagination, we can almost hear the sound of a judge's hammer striking not in anger, but in balance, a soft reminder that power, when guided by justice, creates not tyranny, but peace. Chapter 12. Daily Mysteries and Oddities. If you were to wander through the streets of ancient Rome, not as a senator or a soldier, but as a quiet observer, you would discover a world full of curious beliefs, strange customs, and subtle mysteries woven into everyday life. Beneath the logic of law and the order of empire, the Romans lived in a universe alive with unseen forces. To them, the world was not merely physical, it was spiritual, magical, and deeply symbolic. They believed that every event, no matter how small, carried meaning. A sneeze at the wrong moment could change the outcome of a meeting. The sudden flight of birds across the sky might be a sign from the gods. A dream, a whisper, or the flicker of a flame, all could be messages from the divine. And so, even in a civilization famous for its discipline and reason, mystery was never far away. Let's begin with superstition. The Romans were deeply superstitious, though they preferred to call it religio, a careful respect for divine will. They believed that life was filled with invisible spirits known as noumena, beings who inhabited trees, rivers, fields, and even doorways. Every home had its guardian spirits, known as lares and penates, who protected the family and watched over the hearth. Before meals, small offerings of food or wine were placed on the household altar to keep these spirits pleased. It was a quiet ritual, performed daily, binding generations together in gratitude and reverence. But outside the home, the Romans also sought signs from the gods through a practice known as augury. Augurs were special priests who studied the flight patterns of birds to interpret the divine will. If the birds flew from the left to the right, it was a good omen. If they flew the other way, the gods were displeased. Before battles, before elections, even before the founding of cities, augurs were consulted. Legend says that when Romulus founded Rome, he marked the city's boundaries only after interpreting favorable omens from the skies. To the Romans, destiny was written not just in stone or scrolls, but in the wings of birds above them. There were also the haruspices, priests who practiced a more unsettling form of divination. They read the future in the entrails of sacrificed animals, usually sheep or oxen. Each organ told a story: the shape of the liver, the color of the lungs, the marks upon the heart. Though this may sound grim to us, to the Romans it was an act of great seriousness. The gods did not speak directly, but through symbols, and the wise could learn to read them. Superstition touched nearly every part of Roman life. If a person stumbled on the threshold of their home, it was seen as a bad omen. If a candle suddenly went out, it meant misfortune. Babies wore protective charms called buli around their necks to guard against evil spirits. Brides were careful not to trip on their wedding day. It was said to curse the marriage. Even the number of times you sneezed could be taken as a sign. To protect oneself, Romans often muttered short blessings under their breath or carried amulets shaped like hands, eyes, or phallic symbols, all believed to ward off the evil eye, a curse born of envy or malice. And then there were curses themselves. The Romans practiced a kind of magical justice that allowed ordinary people to call upon dark forces when they felt wronged. On thin sheets of lead, they would scratch out curses called defictiones, naming their enemies and describing the harm they wished upon them. These tablets were often folded, pierced with nails, and dropped into wells, graves, or sacred springs, believed to carry the message directly to the underworld. Some curse tablets still survive today, covered in the tiny, trembling handwriting of someone desperate for revenge or justice. Yet not all mysteries were dark. The Romans also looked to the stars for guidance. Astrology was immensely popular. Even emperors consulted astrologers to know whether the stars favored them. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, claimed that he was born under the sign of Capricorn and used that symbol on his coins as a mark of destiny. While official law sometimes banned astrology, especially when predictions hinted at rebellion, it continued to thrive in secret. For the Romans, fate was written across the heavens, and many believed that their lives followed a pattern set by the gods long before their birth. Medicine, too, had its share of mystery. Roman doctors combined practical knowledge with superstition. They treated wounds with honey, vinegar, and herbs, and they performed surprisingly advanced surgeries for their time. But they also relied on charms and prayers. For example, a fever might be treated with both herbs and an incantation to Apollo, the god of healing. Some doctors carried amulets inscribed with sacred words, believing they could drive illness away. In the great public baths, where people gathered daily to wash and socialize, hygiene and healing intertwined. The warm waters were thought to cleanse not only the body, but the spirit. Steam rooms, massages, and aromatic oils turned bathing into a ritual of renewal. Romans believed that cleanliness pleased the gods, and the baths became symbols of health, community, and spiritual balance. Dining customs, too, reveal much about the Roman sense of ritual and oddity. At banquets, guests reclined on couches while slaves served course after course of food: roasted meats, fruits, bread, olives, and spiced wine. But dining was not only about eating, it was a performance. People believed that certain foods brought good fortune: pomegranates for fertility, honey for happiness, eggs for beginnings. And always, the first bite or sip was offered to the household gods. Funerary customs were equally fascinating. Death, for the Romans, was both feared and respected. They believed that the spirits of the dead lingered near the living and could bring either blessing or misfortune. Funerals were elaborate affairs. Musicians played, mourners wailed, and actors sometimes wore wax masks of the deceased's ancestors, linking the dead to their lineage. Coins were placed in the mouth of the dead as payment for Charon, the ferryman who carried souls across the river Styx. After the burial, the family would return home to purify themselves with water and offer food to the spirit for 9 days. On the final day, they held a feast, a celebration that marked the soul's peaceful journey to the afterlife. But Romans also had everyday fears that felt almost modern. They feared ghosts. They feared bad dreams. They feared that forgotten spirits might haunt those who failed to honor them. To keep the peace between the living and the dead, they held an annual festival called Lemuria. During this solemn night, the head of each household would walk barefoot through the house at midnight, throwing black beans over his shoulder and chanting prayers to drive away restless ghosts. It was believed that the spirits followed the beans, collecting them as offerings before leaving in silence. And yet, despite all these fears and rituals, the Romans were not a gloomy people. They found joy in the mystery of existence. They believed the universe was filled with divine order, even if they could not see it. Life to them was a dance between fate and free will, between human effort and divine will. They honored their gods, but they also laughed at their own superstitions. The same person who visited a temple might later consult a fortune teller or knock on wood to avoid bad luck. Perhaps that is what made Rome so human. Its people lived in a world of both marble and mystery, building cities with mathematical precision while whispering prayers to unseen gods. They dreamed, feared, hoped, and loved much like we do today. Their mysteries remind us that even in an age of reason, humans crave meaning. We still look for signs, we still fear the unknown, and we still whisper to the universe, asking for luck, love, and protection. So, as the night deepens and our quiet journey through ancient Rome continues, imagine standing beneath the Roman stars. The air is warm, the Tiber glimmers faintly in the moonlight, and from a nearby home, you catch the soft murmur of a prayer, an offering to the household gods, a wish for safety, or perhaps a plea for a dream undisturbed. And in that moment, across the centuries, you realize that though empires fall and cities change, the mysteries of daily life, the fears, hopes, and quiet rituals remain timeless. Chapter 13: The Gladiators and the Blood Games of Rome. In the heart of ancient Rome, entertainment was not a quiet affair. It was a roaring spectacle of blood, sand, and steel. The gladiatorial games were more than just brutal contests. They were a mirror reflecting Roman society, its ambitions, its fears, and its obsession with power and spectacle. When people think of Rome, one of the first images that comes to mind is the Colosseum. But the idea of gladiators predates this massive arena. The tradition began centuries earlier, during the days of the Republic. Originally, gladiatorial combat was not a form of public entertainment at all. It started as part of funeral rites. Wealthy families would organize duels between slaves or prisoners at the funerals of powerful men, believing that spilling blood honored the spirits of the dead. Over time, however, Romans discovered that these bloody performances attracted crowds, and once they realized that people enjoyed watching men fight to the death, it evolved into one of the empire's greatest public spectacles. By the height of the Roman Empire, the games had become a carefully organized, state-funded phenomenon. The emperors themselves sponsored them to win the love of the people. In a society filled with class divisions, poverty, and political unrest, the games provided distraction and unity. As long as the people had bread and circuses, as the satirist Juvenal once wrote, they would remain loyal to their rulers. A typical day at the arena began early in the morning. Crowds from every corner of the city would flood the stands, from senators and noblewomen dressed in fine silk, to slaves and merchants seated high up in the stone terraces. The air was filled with excitement and with fear. Trumpets would blare, the gates would open, and out would come wild animals brought from across the empire, lions from Africa, tigers from the east, bears from the Alps. In the first events of the day, hunters known as bestiarii would face these beasts armed with spears or swords. Sometimes they triumphed. Often they were torn apart to the cheers of tens of thousands. As the sun climbed higher, the main attraction began: the gladiators. These were not random men plucked off the street. Gladiators were trained professionals, kept in special schools called ludi. where they practiced day and night under strict discipline. Most were slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals sentenced to fight. But some were volunteers, poor free men who chose the arena for the promise of fame, wealth, or redemption. In a strange way, gladiators were both despised and adored. Though they were often seen as property of their masters, the public worshipped them like heroes. Their faces appeared on graffiti, oil lamps, and even children's toys. They represented the Roman ideals of courage, endurance, and the refusal to surrender. Training in the ludus was harsh. Recruits were taught how to use various weapons, from the short sword called the gladius to the trident and net used by retiarii. Each type of gladiator had a distinct fighting style and armor. The murmillo wore a heavy helmet and carried a large shield. The Thraex fought with curved blades and lighter armor. Matches were designed to pair contrasting fighters, creating drama and balance, brute force against agility, heavy defense against clever speed. But contrary to popular belief, not every match ended in death. Gladiators were expensive investments, and owners did not wish to lose their fighters too easily. Many fights ended when one combatant was disarmed or wounded, raising a finger to plead for mercy. The crowd would then turn to the emperor or the editor, the organizer of the games, who would decide their fate with a simple gesture. A thumb turned upward or downward determined whether the man would live or die. Yet even when spared, the psychological scars of the arena remained. Few lived long lives. Beyond the thrill of battle, the games carried deep political meaning. They were a display of Rome's wealth and dominance. The animals came from lands the Romans had conquered, symbolizing their power over nature and foreign peoples. The gladiators themselves were reminders of Rome's enemies, defeated warriors forced to fight for Roman entertainment. Watching them die reaffirmed the citizens' sense of superiority and the empire's control. It was not just sport, it was theater, politics, and propaganda woven together. There were also moral debates. Some philosophers, like Seneca, criticized the games as cruel and corrupting. He described how spectators became numb to violence, cheering for suffering as if it were a game. Others, however, saw the arena as a place where bravery and discipline were tested. To many Romans, the gladiator embodied the virtues of virtues: courage, strength, and honor in the face of death. Not all gladiators were men. Records show that there were female gladiators too, called gladiatrices. Though rare, they fought in smaller shows and were treated as novelties, often drawing huge crowds. These women defied expectations in a society that limited their freedom, and their participation made the spectacle even more sensational. Over time, the games grew more extravagant. Emperors like Titus, who inaugurated the Colosseum, and Commodus, who fancied himself a gladiator, used the arena to display power and win admiration. Commodus even stepped into the sand himself, fighting in staged battles that made him appear invincible, though in truth, his opponents dared not harm him. The Colosseum, capable of holding over 50,000 people, became a symbol of Roman identity, a monument to both human genius and cruelty. But as the centuries passed, the mood began to change. The rise of Christianity brought new moral ideas. The brutal games came to be seen as sinful, unworthy of a civilized society. When the empire began to weaken, the resources to sustain such enormous spectacles faded as well. The last recorded gladiatorial games took place in the 5th century AD, long after the glory of Rome had begun to dim. And yet, the image of the gladiator endures, the man standing in the center of the arena, bloodied but unbroken, defying death for the roar of the crowd. He remains one of the most haunting symbols of ancient Rome, a testament to its splendor, its cruelty, and its eternal fascination with power and spectacle. Chapter 14: Slavery and the Life of the Common People in Ancient Rome. To understand the greatness of ancient Rome, one must also understand the lives of the people who built it, the millions who toiled in silence, whose names were forgotten, yet whose labor kept the empire alive. Beneath the marble temples, grand villas, and roaring arenas lay the hands of slaves, peasants, and workers who formed the foundation of Roman society. Slavery in ancient Rome was not a side feature of the empire, it was its backbone. Almost every aspect of Roman life, from farming to architecture, from education to entertainment, depended on slave labor. Historians estimate that during the height of the empire, nearly 1 in 3 people in Italy was a slave. To the Romans, slavery was not strange or immoral. It was simply the natural order of things. Slaves came from many places and backgrounds. Some were captured in wars, soldiers and civilians from conquered lands such as Gaul, Greece, North Africa, and the East. Others were born into slavery, inheriting their status from their parents. A few were victims of poverty, sold by their families or by themselves in exchange for survival. Rome's hunger for labor was endless, and its conquests supplied a steady stream of new captives. After every military victory, thousands were marched into the city in chains, their fates sealed by the empire's appetite for wealth and expansion. Once in Rome, a slave's life depended largely on luck. Some were purchased by the wealthy elite to serve as domestic servants. These slaves cooked, cleaned, cared for children, and attended to the personal needs of their masters. They lived inside large villas, often in small, dark rooms near the kitchens or stables. While they were not free, domestic slaves sometimes enjoyed better living conditions than those who worked in the fields or mines. Their proximity to the family could bring opportunities. Some earned trust, education, and even a chance at freedom. Other slaves were not so fortunate. Many were sent to work on vast agricultural estates known as latifundia, especially in southern Italy and Sicily. These farms were enormous, producing olive oil, wine, and grain on a massive scale for export throughout the empire. The work was brutal. Long hours under the scorching sun, little food, and harsh punishment for disobedience. Overseers used whips to drive the slaves, and illness or exhaustion often led to death. Yet for Rome, these estates were a source of incredible wealth. The food they produced fed the growing cities, including Rome itself, whose population exceeded 1 million people at its peak. Some slaves were forced into even harsher labor, the mines. Deep underground, in darkness and dust, they hacked at rock for silver, gold, and copper. Few survived long in these conditions. To the Roman state, miners were disposable. Their deaths were simply part of the cost of empire. But not all slaves were uneducated or unskilled. Among the enslaved were teachers, artists, doctors, and craftsmen, prisoners of war from advanced civilizations such as Greece. Wealthy Romans prized Greek slaves in particular, considering them cultured and intelligent. Many wealthy households had a Greek tutor to educate their children. In this way, Greek culture, its philosophy, art, and science, deeply influenced Roman society, even though it came through the voices of the enslaved. Freedom, while rare, was not impossible for a Roman slave. Some could earn or be granted manumission, formal release from servitude. A freed slave became a libertus, a freedman, and although they still owed respect and loyalty to their former master, they were legally recognized as Roman citizens. Many freedmen worked as artisans, shopkeepers, or assistants in business. Some became very wealthy, running enterprises on behalf of their patrons. Yet, even with freedom, the social stain of slavery was hard to erase. Roman society was built on hierarchy, and those born in chains could never fully escape the shadow of their past. Outside the world of slavery, life for the common free citizen, the plebeian, was not easy either. Most Romans were not nobles or senators. They were laborers, merchants, farmers, and soldiers. In the bustling city of Rome, many lived in crowded apartment blocks called insulae. These buildings could rise several stories high, with wooden walls and narrow staircases. The lower floors were occupied by the slightly better off, while the upper levels, far from the water supply and prone to collapse or fire, were rented by the poor. Daily life for these people was a constant struggle. They woke early, worked long hours, and returned home to small, dimly lit rooms. Cooking was often done on small portable stoves, and water had to be fetched from public fountains. There were no modern conveniences, and sanitation was poor. Disease was common, and many died young. Yet, despite the hardship, there was life and color in the city streets. Vendors shouted their wares, children played with clay toys, and storytellers gathered crowds in the squares. The Roman government, aware of the danger of unrest among the poor, tried to keep the people content. Grain was distributed to citizens at a reduced price, or even for free, a practice known as the annona. Public baths were built where citizens of all classes could wash, relax, and socialize. The baths were not just places of hygiene, but centers of community life. People discussed politics, made business deals, and exchanged gossip as they soaked in warm water. For many, it was one of the few pleasures they could afford. Entertainment was another powerful tool used to control the masses. The amphitheaters, circuses, and theaters of Rome offered a constant stream of distractions: chariot races, plays, athletic contests, and of course, the gladiatorial games. These spectacles were more than amusement. They were a political instrument. By giving the people excitement, emperors ensured loyalty and prevented rebellion. It was the famous Roman formula: panem et circenses, bread and circuses. For women, life in Rome was shaped by status and family. A wealthy matron could hold influence within her household, manage finances, and even advise her husband on political matters. But for most women, freedom was limited. They could not vote or hold office, and their lives revolved around domestic duties: cooking, weaving, raising children. However, some women, particularly freed women and widows, ran small businesses, owned property, or worked as midwives and shopkeepers. The daily life of a Roman woman, like that of a man, depended largely on fortune and class. Religion, too, played a major role in the lives of both slaves and free people. Every household had a small shrine for the lares and penates, the guardian spirits of the home. People prayed for protection, good harvests, and health. Festivals filled the calendar, honoring gods like Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. These celebrations brought joy and unity, offering brief escapes from the struggles of daily life. Even the poorest citizens could take part, reminding everyone that they were part of something larger, the great Roman world. Despite the deep social divides, there was a sense of shared identity that held the empire together. Whether rich or poor, free or enslaved, all lived under the shadow of Rome, the greatest power the ancient world had ever known. Its roads, markets, and temples connected people from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. For the slaves, Rome was a cage. For the free poor, it was a challenge. For the rich, it was a stage. But for all, it was home, a city of contradictions, beauty, and hardship intertwined. By the end of the empire, as wars, corruption, and economic troubles grew, the system that had once seemed eternal began to crumble. The dependence on slave labor weakened innovation. The widening gap between rich and poor bred resentment. The same forces that had built Rome's greatness would one day help destroy it. But during its long centuries of glory, the daily rhythm of ordinary people, their labor, their faith, and their endurance, gave life to the empire that ruled the world. Chapter 15. Religion and the Gods of Ancient Rome. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the skyline of ancient Rome. Among the marble columns and bustling streets, temples rise like mountains of stone. The air smells of incense and burning offerings. You hear the chanting of priests, the clatter of hooves on the cobblestones, and the murmur of crowds gathering for a festival. This was not just a city of laws and soldiers. It was a city of gods. Religion was woven into every part of Roman life. It guided politics, family, war, and even business. For the Romans, the divine was everywhere, in the hearth of a home, in the fields, in the rivers, in the stars above. To live was to exist under the gaze of countless gods, each watching, judging, and influencing the fate of men. But Roman religion was not born overnight. It was a blend, a grand tapestry woven from many cultures and centuries. In its earliest days, when Rome was still a cluster of huts on the Palatine Hill, the people worshipped the spirits of nature. They believed every tree, spring, and mountain had a divine presence. These spirits were known as noumena, invisible forces that shaped the world. There were no temples, no statues, only simple offerings left under trees or by rivers. As Rome grew, its religion evolved with it. The Romans began to name their gods, to give them faces and stories. Many of these deities were borrowed or adapted from their neighbors, especially the Greeks and the Etruscans. From the Greeks came Jupiter, the king of the gods, modeled after Zeus. His wife, Juno, became the protector of women and marriage. Minerva, the goddess of wisdom, mirrored Athena. Mars, the god of war, stood as a symbol of Roman strength and courage, while Venus, the goddess of love, embodied beauty and desire. Over time, these gods formed a vast pantheon, a divine family that watched over every part of life. Each had a domain. Neptune ruled the sea, Ceres watched over crops, Apollo brought light and music, and Diana guarded the forests and the moon. Even the hearth fire at home was sacred, tended by the goddess Vesta. Her priestesses, the Vestal Virgins, were among the most respected figures in Rome. To the Romans, religion was not about personal faith, as it is for many people today. It was about duty, about keeping peace with the gods, known as the Pax Deorum. The Romans believed that if they performed the proper rituals and sacrifices, the gods would protect their city and bless their undertakings. If something went wrong, a drought, an earthquake, a defeat in battle, it meant the gods were displeased. Priests and augurs would then examine signs and omens, trying to learn which god was offended and what must be done to restore balance. Priests in Rome were not mysterious holy men living apart from society. They were politicians, scholars, and respected citizens. Religion and politics walked hand in hand. When a general prepared for war, he first consulted the augurs, who read the will of the gods through the flight of birds or the entrails of sacrificed animals. A favorable omen meant the gods supported the campaign. A bad one could delay a military march or even stop it entirely. The calendar itself revolved around religion. Nearly every month was filled with festivals and holy days. There were days for planting, days for harvest, days for honoring the dead, and days for celebrating the founding of the city. During these festivals, the streets of Rome burst with color and sound. Processions moved through the city, priests in white robes, musicians playing pipes and drums, children carrying flowers, and crowds throwing petals into the air. Animals were sacrificed at the temples, and the smell of roasted meat filled the air. These were times of joy and unity, moments when rich and poor stood side by side in reverence. Among the most important religious buildings in Rome was the Pantheon, the temple of all gods. Its massive dome and oculus remain one of the architectural wonders of the world. To stand inside it was to feel the immensity of the divine, as sunlight streamed through the circular opening in the roof and danced across the marble floor. The Pantheon symbolized Rome's belief that the divine was everywhere and that all gods, Roman, Greek, Egyptian, or otherwise, had a place under the empire's wide sky. As Rome expanded, it absorbed the religions of conquered peoples. Instead of destroying foreign gods, the Romans welcomed them. They built temples for Egyptian deities like Isis and adopted Persian gods such as Mithras, whose cult became especially popular among soldiers. Religion in Rome was a reflection of its empire, vast, diverse, and tolerant, so long as loyalty to the emperor remained unquestioned. One of the most remarkable developments in Roman religion was the rise of emperor worship. Beginning with Augustus, the first emperor, rulers began to be seen as divine or semi-divine beings. Statues of emperors stood in temples, and citizens were expected to offer incense or prayers in their honor. To worship the emperor was to show loyalty to Rome itself. For many, this was simply another form of patriotism, but for others, especially followers of new religions like Christianity, it became a dangerous test of faith. For centuries, the traditional Roman religion thrived. Every home had a small shrine to the household gods, the Lares and Penates, who protected the family and ensured prosperity. Before each meal, offerings of wine or bread were made. Farmers prayed to Ceres for good crops, sailors to Neptune for safe voyages, and soldiers to Mars for victory. The gods were part of daily conversation, part of every action. Even the oath of loyalty, the sacramentum, was made in their name. But as time went on, cracks began to appear in this religious system. The empire became too vast, too complex, and too diverse for its old traditions to hold everyone together. People began searching for something more personal, more spiritual. Mystery cults and foreign religions offered emotional experiences that the traditional Roman faith did not. Among them was Christianity, a small persecuted sect that would one day transform the empire itself. In the early centuries, Christians were viewed with suspicion and hostility. They refused to sacrifice to the emperor or to take part in the public rituals that honored the Roman gods. This defiance was seen not just as religious stubbornness, but as treason. Many Christians were arrested, tortured, and executed. Yet, despite the persecution, their numbers grew. Their message of hope, forgiveness, and eternal life spread across the empire, quietly, from house to house, city to city. By the 4th century AD, the unthinkable happened. Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, ending centuries of persecution. The old gods, once the beating heart of Rome, began to fade. Temples fell into ruin, sacrifices stopped, and crosses appeared where Jupiter's eagles once stood. The transformation was slow, but by the end of the 4th century, Christianity had become the official religion of the Roman Empire. It was the end of one world and the beginning of another. Yet, the influence of Rome's ancient religion never truly disappeared. The architecture of its temples inspired churches. Its festivals shaped the Christian calendar. Its language, Latin, became the tongue of prayer for centuries to come. Even the Roman idea that the divine is intertwined with law, duty, and order still echoes in modern thought. When we think of the gods of Rome today, we often picture them as distant myths, figures of marble frozen in museums. But to the Romans, they were living presences, as real as the sunrise, as close as the household fire. Their stories of love, betrayal, power, and sacrifice reflected the human condition itself. Through them, Rome sought to understand the mysteries of fate and the meaning of existence. In the end, religion in ancient Rome was not just about gods, it was about belonging to a family, to a city, to a destiny. It gave people a sense of purpose, a link between the mortal and the divine. It shaped the way Rome saw itself and the world beyond its borders. And even after the empire's fall, its spirit, that longing to connect heaven and earth, continued to burn quietly through the centuries that followed.